what I thought I'd just say first about why crime fiction, and not, we're not real writers, we just write genre.
That's right.
There's a lovely piece that Lee Child wrote. Maybe the first story ever told was about a man who was attacked by a saber-toothed tiger but escaped. And then maybe over 1,000 years that developed, and a man met a saber-toothed tiger and killed it. So I think that adventure fiction, suspense, whatever you want to call it, was the fiction. That's how it started, and it has continued in an unbroken line for 100,000 years. As everything got more civilized, more coddled, all these other genres grew up alongside it, including literary fiction, as a luxury, as a kind of barnacle on our boat. Now, if you don't agree with that, tough. Because you're looking at 4 women crime writers, and we don't argue with you. So, why don't we start down at the far end? Zoe Ferraris. Next comes Julia Spencer Fleming, then
What's her name? Yes, my dear.
Her old friend.
Sharon Newman, and I'm Laurie King. So, Zoe, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, I have 3 books out right now. They are mysteries. Yes.
We're going to have to get the mics going better because
Okay.
it's not going to
Can
work
you
to
hear
stand up.
in the back? Yeah. Am I okay? I am Zoe Ferraris. I have 3 books out right now. They're mysteries set in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. My protagonist is a devout Muslim man named Nair, who is pretty much looking for a wife and living in a society where he's not allowed to talk to women. So he stumbles on a dead body, and it is a sister of a friend of his. Nobody believes she was murdered, but he does. He has an intimate knowledge of the desert. So he has to go pursue the potential murder investigation on his own, but this is obviously difficult because he's not allowed to talk to women or know anything about them. So the 3 books are about Nair and a woman he eventually comes to know named Katya, who helps him with this investigation. They're all separate murders, and I lived in Saudi Arabia myself. My ex-husband was from there. We have a daughter together, and we went back there supposedly for 2 weeks to visit his family and show off our daughter. We ended up staying for almost a year. I lived in a very conservative neighborhood in Jeddah, and inside an Arab family with almost no contact with Americans for the whole time. It was a very intense and fascinating experience that is really my inspiration for these books.
Me?
Julia.
Oh, okay. Yes. Hi, I'm Julia Spencer Fleming. I write the Claire Ferguson, Russ Van Alstyne series set in a small town in upstate New York. One of my co-protagonists, Claire Ferguson, is an Episcopal priest at the start. Piskies. Yo.
You're playing to the home team.
I am. That's right. We'll do the hymns of the titles later on in the evening. But Claire is a former Army officer, and at the start of the first book, she is literally in her very, very first parish. And she's young, and she's really, really trying to be just the best gosh darn priest she can, and falling down on the job a lot. And one of the many ways that she falls down is the fact that she winds up getting involved in these sort of her urges to social justice and reparative justice keep sucking her into murder investigations, as you know they do for all of us, and so that's sort of one way in which she has a lot of difficulties, and the other is that over the course of the first book or two, she falls in love with the town's chief of police, who also happens to be married, and has to deal with the repercussions of that.
Sharon.
Okay.
I got it right?
No, it's Karen. Okay. Yes, Sharon, but spelled funny. Anyway, I have 10 medieval mysteries out, 1 standalone, and 3 nonfictions with the 4th coming out soon. I'm a medieval historian and I'm a writer, and I have been both for almost 40 years now. And please, please tell me that I started when I was 10. So my books are set in medieval France. And people say, why don't you write about England? And I said, I don't write about places that don't have decent wine. So that's my, but it's 12th century France, which is the area of my expertise. And I became interested not just in the period, but in writing these mysteries, particularly because I read the textbooks in the secondary literature, and especially when it came to talking about Jews, it was always, Jews were persecuted, they wore badges, they were miserable, they got thrown out. And then I would read primary documents, and I found that that just wasn't the case, that the synagogue in Paris at this time was going fine, that a lot of the student lodgings for the universities, or not the university, the cathedral schools were owned by Jews. They rented to Christians. Jews had Christian servants. Christians had some Jewish servants. I mean, there was still a small fraction of the population, and I wanted to really write about how people interacted. And as my editor keeps reminding me, there are bodies. And a lot of the plots sort of go around things that really happened. So one is about a real theft of a relic. Another one is a pilgrimage to Compostela in Spain, because I wanted to go. Another one is about the 1148 Council of Reims. It's called Heresy. And I heard you, oh wow, the 11 for nobody ever does that, and it's my favorite council. Well, it's my favorite council. And I was going on and on about to my editor, because she'd already bought the book without knowing what I was going to write. And so I spent 5 minutes explaining to her why this was such a cool council. And finally there's this little voice that said, you are going to kill somebody, aren't you? And I promised I would. But for me, it's the human interaction that makes the story. So that's what I do.
Very good. Now, is it possible that we can get these mics so that they're working? Can you hear me? Okay.
Oh, good.
Okay. I could just swallow it if you like. Okay, so that's not it. So we don't.
Okay.
So basically, we have no mics. Gotcha. Okay, then I won't try talking into it. Thank you. Tech special here, guys. I thought that we might start by just a quick definition. What is the difference between religion and theology? Because we've sort of, build this thing as a discussion about religion and theology, and it's something that will come up. I don't know if you guys are going to talk about it, but I got the paper.
I can do it in a sentence.
I figured somebody could.
Well, maybe you can too.
No, I'm just thinking this is really just an elaborate excuse for Laurie to bring out that degree in comparative religions.
Yeah, it's easy. Religion is what people practice. Theology is what people study.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you.
There you go.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, theology is God talk, theos logos, and so that is when you want to talk about the divine, then it's rather more intellectual than spiritual. And I mean, I mention this because my character often comes into face-to-face problems with. She is a theologian who occasionally has to be reminded that there are religious people out there. But this is one of the things that I think we deal with when we're writing, is we have an audience, and one assumes that we're writing books not entirely for ourselves. We write a book so that we can share a story of some kind. Can we each say something about how you write about a specific group that may be foreign to 99% of the readers? How you make it sympathetic, interesting, and and enriching to the story itself. Do you want to start, Sharon, and move the other way this time? Sure.
I haven't the foggiest idea.
Julia.
That's okay. She knew the answer to the first one. So, well, I have it, I think, easier than anybody else because I'm writing contemporary stories set in contemporaneous, and although people might not be intimately familiar with the Episcopal Church, though why not? I don't know. But it's something that is somewhat familiar. The way that I try and do it to make it comprehensible is, I think, really the technique you use whenever or one technique that you can use, making the foreign or the apparent to other people, and that is Claire, the Reverend Claire Ferguson, is surrounded by a lot of pretty secular people, including, probably most importantly, the police chief, her partner in detection, who is himself a very strong agnostic, if not an outright atheist. So, like a lot of actively religious people in our society, certainly in certain parts of it. I live in Maine, which is one of the most irreligious places in the United States, seriously. A lot of us who are practicing, move in a sea of very secularized people. And so it's in that interface where the priest intersects with other people that I think we get a natural revelation. It gives me opportunities as an author to sort of peel away and say, well, this is what she stands for, and this is what the church says, and this is what some people believe, and this is what other people believe.
I think it's difficult to take theological ideas and make them real in life in general. So it's hard in novels as well. Like in any situation that you face, you think, okay, what would I do? What's the right thing to do? And that's always a tricky decision to make on some level. I have to say with Islam, there's a little bit of an easy way out in this regard, in that my personal observation, I should own this, is that Islam is very focused on detail. And there's a lot, at least growing up Christian, I did not ever experience a religion that told me how to cut my hair. That tells you the detail. I mean, that there are just a phenomenal amount of rules that come out, and they're not written into the Quran or anything, but they're discussed continually by religious authorities. Like very esteemed religious authorities have no problem discussing how you cut your beard. They don't think of that as a step down from their theology. It's just part of everything, and they, everything that exists on earth is falls under the religious, field. So they're just like incredible. I mean, how you clip your nails, whether you clip your nails, literally how many inches of your beard, and so those are actually very concrete details that you can put into a book. And I would say too, in my novels, that my experience of Saudi Arabia was that religion is so much more a part of daily life than it is here. It is sort of forced on you in a way that it isn't here. I feel like in America you do have a distinct choice. You can live your whole life here and not necessarily encounter it or be forced to follow rules that are determined by religion. That isn't true over there. So in a way, I have a little bit of an easier way getting those issues out in the book, because they're part of the lives of my characters.
This ties in very closely to the kind of thing. In fact, I was going to come back to this question, so let's do it now, and you can finish your answer. The idea of when you have this all-pervasive society, when you have a society where religion is in every aspect of life, whether it's modern-day Saudi Arabia or whether it's medieval Europe, I found it very interesting that the two of you are coming from a very similar point of view in the writing. That is, everything you are writing has to do with religion, whether it's the Christians or the Jews in your books. Religion guides every step of the way. How do you deal with that in terms of allowing the story to go forward?
I think that it drives the story. A lot of my books have to do with, like the Relic book and so forth, it has to do with Christian belief. But also I know that in the Middle Ages there wasn't one Christian belief. People say that that was the case, but every person had their own belief, and often it was mixed in with folklore and pre-Christian things or stories that they misunderstood, because the average person, first of all, Christians in the 12th century did not go to church every Sunday. They finally had to say, look, Easter and Christmas, you gotta go then. But most people didn't. And they opened the markets in Troyes on Sundays because the Jews wouldn't have the markets on Saturdays, or wouldn't have the markets on, they wouldn't have the market on Saturday. So for the Christian part, it's much looser, and it has to do the stories have to do with people misunderstanding their religion. For the Jewish part, there was a very fine American scholar of the 20th century who said that the Jews would not have survived without the minutiae, without the laws. And, if you didn't have to, all of those things, like if you have to travel on a Sunday or a Saturday, you have to get off your horse and lead it. And I opened, actually, Strong as Death, the book that's out there, I open with three Jews arguing about, if they cut a deer that they found in the kosher manner and drain its blood, can they eat it? And two say, yes, we're hungry, and the third one says, absolutely not. So I think for Islam, that's pretty close. Mm-hmm. So but again, that informs the story. It helps create the characters.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's interesting.
One of the things that I found with all three of you as writers is that, as you say, we live in a very secular society, and even if we are involved in the church or the temple or the mosque, and we have it as a regular part of our life, most of our days are spent among people for whom God is not an everyday topic of conversation. And I find it fascinating how the three of you all managed to write about these structures of required living, as it were, that many secular people would find oppressive. I mean, I think Zoe's is the extreme there, is that, why every person in Saudi is not utterly stark raving insane. Those of us who live with freedom and who expect to be given the right to choose, 95% of the time, the idea of having our every behavior hedged in would be terrifying. The same way with, being a Jew in medieval times.
Well, there were a lot who apostatized.
But what I think that you do so beautifully is to show the joy in this. And it's easy to show joy in freedom, but it's hard to show joy in the acceptance of, submission.
Submission, that was the word I was thinking, yeah.
The word Islam means is submission. And it's not just, okay, you're bigger than I am, I'll put my head down and do it. It's, I take joy in submitting to your will. And I think, that to me is a really exciting thing about writing about religion that you can't do in writing about anything else. So do you guys want to say something about that? Zoe, do you want to start it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, my main character struggles to interpret. His culture is doing so much interpreting of religion for him, and he's struggling to live a life that is in keeping with that cultural interpretation. And there's a certain comfort, and this is what he sort of discovers at the end of the first book, that when he finally accepts that what he wants is to break the rules that have been laid down for him, he's sad about that. Like there's a loss, there's a sense of loss, and there is sort of a strange freedom in restriction. It's having answers already. It's having things answered for you. It's almost having something black and white, and you don't have to question it. It's like being hemmed in sort of in a comfortable way sometimes. And I know that for an American reader it might seem really just completely oppressive, but I think that enculturation explains a lot of one's attitude toward things. So, you know, if you grew up in a culture where women just cover their hair all the time, then there's nothing sort of strange about that. You know, it's just sort of normal. And
They certainly did it in the 12th century.
yeah, we've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, we do it. I think you do a really good job. We see Nair at pray. He prays regularly. And sometimes it's just mentioned. He rolled out his prayer mat and he prays. But other times, and I've noticed this because I've struggled a little bit trying to describe my priest of prayer without it sounding like I'm trying to be, Tim LaHaye writing Left Behind. That's the difficulty with contemporary Christianity is, you don't want to go too far into being that person. But you do, I think there's this real sense, you get sense in some of the scenes of exactly how that refreshes his soul. He's troubled, he's got problems with his friends, or what his relationship with Kachi should be. And he brings it into prayer, and he prays and he rises up and he is better. He feels more balanced. He's got new insights. He's ready to sort of get out there and battle the world again. And I think that's really well done.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good point that submission can be really strengthening and really fulfilling, and it can provide a kind of psychic or psychological freedom that you don't have if you're constantly questioning or you really don't know the answer or something. But at the same time, like I said, he struggles. Nair struggles, and particularly in his case, Islam says get married and have kids. So it's like a kind of a contradiction built into the structure of the way it's interpreted as well.
Sharon, do you want to talk about the idea of taking joy in restriction? I mean, certainly.
I don't think they would see it as taking joy in restriction.
Well,
certainly,
if you look at, for example, a monastic community.
Yeah, if you read the sermons of Saint Bernard, I don't think they're in paperback yet, though. But you can tell that he takes a great deal of joy in the cloister, and several of the, if you read Hildegard of Bingen or somebody like that, there's the structure is important to her, and it leaves her. The ultimate goal is to be not one with God, but to be as close to God as possible, and to have all the outside world go away. Now, in day-to-day life, people didn't do that, but in monasticism, that was the essential part of it. So I have some of those there too. That it's a mysticism almost. It's touching the divine. And when you get into Kabbalah studies, which really just began in the middle of the 11th or 12th century, that's the same thing. It's throwing away all of the theology and just being one with God.
Yes, it's interesting that as novelists, we are permitted, especially as crime novelists, we really can write about pretty much anything.
As long as you have a body.
You gotta have a corpse. Although, there's one or two where you think you have a corpse, but you gotta at least think you have a corpse. But there's certain areas that, especially because, New York tends to be really conservative about, well, if only 10% of the people will understand this, then you're not gonna sell it. But the business of expressing a personal relationship with the divine is something that we as a society are not really comfortable with. I have a simple way of dealing with it, in that my main character, who's Mary Russell, is this theologian, and she doesn't really consider herself religious, and she's startled when she meets people who are religious, as I said, and it means that she can look at this joy with a sort of awe and wonder of how you get to that place where you find joy in such a simple thing as talking to God, or getting down on a prayer mat on a busy street and You stop the car. I have to say, I kept envisioning these terrible, terrible traffic jams at prayer time. Because everybody just yanks over their taxi, and all they are out on the sidewalk. So, you know, it would never go in downtown San Francisco.
You know, it's funny, now that you mention it, I think that our characters all have something in common, which is that looking for that moment or elevating a spiritual experience beyond the mundane interpretation. Like, I'm thinking of your character in particular, Claire, just having she's sort of a little bit sarcastic. She's kind of a young, hip, and like, at least in my mind, she's like young and hip, and she's like former, you know, soldier and Marine, maybe, was it?
She was Army, but
Army,
yeah,
okay.
she's,
And she was like, you know.
She's one of your badass priests.
She's a little badass. She's like a woman priest who's in this small town in upstate New York, and they're all kind of, you know, a little bit conservative and stuffy and fussy. And it's kind of funny to talk about Christianity through that point of view. Have someone, you know, she wants to, like in the book that I read, she wants to help homeless moms or young teenage moms, you know, and the rest of the town's kind of like, but I just get the feeling that you're making a commentary about, like, getting to something essential about a religion and really getting deep down to her understanding, this is what I need to do, you know, here. This is just really realistically looking at this scenario. It isn't about what some scholar said I should do. It isn't about any kind of rule that we have. In fact, she's challenging the rules.
Yeah. Claire's a lousy theologian. She doesn't do that sort of thing. I think I actually say this at one point, and Claire says, and this is very much my own personal belief, is that, you know, we are God's hands in this world. And whatever the divine wants to get done for other people, you know, we need to do it. It's got to come through us, and that's her approach. And I think it's when she gets into those moments in the stories that we get, hopefully the readers get that sort of sense of both the grace of the moment and what it means, what it feels like to be that channel for the divine. And it can be as simple as, you know, giving a meal, you know, helping out at the soup kitchen sometimes, or as difficult as sitting and listening to someone who's a murderer, which of course happens frequently because you gotta have a corpse. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of a calling, you know, a very personal and profound belief that the only choice in life for me is to, you know, to put on the collar and to serve God. I mean, I find that fascinating in terms of writing a crime series, because you know, it should be massively distracting, because I've never felt a calling like that, and yet it's something that informs that character in as I said, some very profound ways.
You know what? You have felt a calling like that, because I don't think you can become a professional writer. It's not something you do to break in for the big bucks, and you know, and
it's all about the money.
No,
yeah.
I think a lot of people have a vocation, and some people don't have the good fortune to find it. But when you find it, that is your calling. So, you know,
it's particularly apt for a crime novel as well as a way. You know, this may sound a little cutthroat, but it's a good way to establish that your character is on the side of justice. You know. Who better to do it than someone who is religiously inclined?
You got to realize that there's three other women thinking, hey, I could have a really bad guy who's a priest.
Well, I did have a nice, interesting lascivious hermit at one point.
Lascivious hermits are good.
In a lot of, you know, in a lot of the panels I've been on about why write crime fiction and so forth, the thing about crime fiction, which I'm sure most of you know, is that there is justice. The whole point of most mystery books is that there's resolution, the bad guy's punished, even if not in the way you expect, and your life isn't like that. So they are morality plays, in essence.
Yeah, the restoration of order in the universe is
exactly
is central to. It's always extremely irritating when you read a crime novel and the writer thinks they're going to be clever and let things dangle at the end.
Ooh.
And it just pisses me off. Because it's not, I mean, it is not a crime novel. It is 99% of a crime novel, and then this other, the barnacle on our hull. That, you know, the whole idea of a crime novel is that it is a quest. You have a person who is trying to find out a truth, to restore a right, and change themselves in the process. I mean, I think that a number of crime writers have picked up on something Mike Connolly said, that when you're writing a crime story, the investigator is working on the crime, but the crime is working on the investigator as well. And I think that when you also bring God into this mix, you know, all of us sort of start out with, we're working a crime, we've got a body, and then you bring in this dimension of a higher responsibility that, you know, that really makes the stories start to run. Is that how you feel when you're starting writing?
It's totally appropriate to the subject of religion. In fact, I feel like religion is where I first heard the story of someone being put through a trial and someone, you know, being tested in some way.
Tested, yeah.
What, you know, at least, I mean, my investigator is a sort of an amateur. He doesn't work for the police or anything, so for him this really is a trial, and I think it would be for most people just to encounter a dead body and try to figure out why that happened, you know, someone you know. Yeah, but I want to say something about an earlier point, like the question of like the mundane aspects of religion versus the sort of the greater thing that I think that we're all kind of striving for, just in our characters in some way. I don't know whether it's conscious or not. I know Islam is often accused of being wrapped up in just the superficialities in some way. You can go online to like fatwa.com and like literally.
That's a real thing?
This is a real thing.
I thought you made it up.
Nah.
It's in the book. It's in one of the books. Fatwa.com.
You know, any religious scholar can get on there and leave an opinion about something, and it's almost like it's like the worst of like an Amazon chat room about a book. You know, it's like everyone. I mean, they've outlawed Mickey Mouse, they've outlawed Valentine's Day. You know, and crazy things come out of that, and they often make the news because they're so radical and crazy. And one of them was recently in Saudi Arabia. Women were not allowed to eat ice cream in public, you know, because most ice cream cones, you don't just do the soft serve because it's too hot over there, so they have to be more like a popsicle, and it actually, you know, looks sort of suggestive. So those were banned, you know. So this kind, like, if you're a religious scholar and really that's what you spend your time thinking about, you should be ashamed of yourself on some level. And there's a lot of that in Saudi Arabia, at least. And you know, it's funny, I meet Muslims from all over the world, and like Lebanon and you know, any other Muslim country, and they're like, you know, if you bring up Saudis, they often get angry on some level, or at least I've heard a lot of it. They're like, oh, they give us a bad name, you know, like the rest of Islam is pretty normal. It's like, it's not some crazy religion, and Saudi is pretty extreme. So I think that it's easy in that context, when it is that extreme, to have a character who's fighting to be a little bit above that, or, you know, reject some of that earthly concern in some way. But I think that goes back to medieval conceptions, like to almost monastic ideas that we're all kind of playing with, which
Definitely.
is like
There's medieval
elevated.
Christianity and medieval Islam are very close in a lot of ways, and even medieval Judaism is the main reason that they didn't get along was because of little things, you know, like because I'm working on the early Crusade period now in the Holy Land, and the mix of all of these different religions. And you know, the more I read about it, the more I realize that these people were all really the same, and that's why so many churches became mosques, became churches, became mosques, and eventually, when Israel, in 1948, became synagogues again. But I you know, there's a whole continuum of religion, and at the height is the people, or the mystics, and there are the Sufi, and there are the hermits, and there are the Kabbalists, and then all the way at the other end are the people who write the parody songs about the Virgin Mother. And there are some really, really gross ones, I can assure you, that were very popular in the Middle Ages. I mean, blasphemy didn't seem to bother them. And you know, medieval Islam was not as strict as Saudi today. One of the things with, like, the jihad, it wasn't until halfway through the Crusader period that the Islamic peoples of the Near East got it together enough to have a jihad. I mean, a lesser jihad. You know, the greater jihad is finding your own personal truth, and the lesser jihad is killing everybody else, which is really not a polite thing to say. That's not true, exactly. But I can go on about this. Sorry, I'm giving you Middle Ages 101. Carry on, guys.
Did you have something you were going to pop in there, Julia?
Oh, no, I was just, what Zoe said about how the Lebanese and, the Syrians are like, don't talk about, Wahhabism because it's embarrassing to the rest of us. And I was just thinking that's exactly how Episcopalians feel about sort of hardcore fundamentalists. It's like, we're not that, no.
Yes, this sort of dialogue that has risen up of, taking back, whether it's Islam or Christianity, me too, and they're not speaking for me, I tell you. So, yes, it's an interesting, you have to have an extreme before the more middle of the road people begin to say, well, wait a minute here. I didn't agree to this at all. Let's talk a little bit about research. I think that not all of us have gone to quite the extent that Zoe has in research. I appreciate it, respect it, and don't envy it in the least. But I wonder if each of you could just talk a little bit about the kinds of things that the sort of information that you're looking for that enriches a crime novel, whether it's book stuff or travel stuff. Do you want to?
Well, so far I've been to Trier, Durham, all over France, Compostela, Italy, and I did do a short story set in Bora Bora, but it wasn't medieval. I just had to deduct the trip. I'm serious.
Yeah.
I go to the places, I tell the IRS, I wrote the story here, and I couldn't have done it if I hadn't been there.
Absolutely.
So far, 40 years now, they've bought it. Nobody here works for the IRS.
You and I have done Zoe and I are doing the wrong thing, She's got to go back to Saudi Arabia if she's doing it. And I have to go to upstate New York during mud season, I mean, it's
well, more fool you.
But I wonder if you could also say, I mean, this is one serious scholar here, and she proudly displayed this book that she just brought. Her suitcase weighs more than any of us at the table, and it's I like this.
I came straight from a medieval conference here
in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Can you believe it? Wow. The medievalist conference at Kalamazoo, Michigan. Life is just interesting. And she proudly displays this book that she just paid hundreds of dollars for. And I'm thinking, oh, that's amazing. They don't have it online or in paperback.
Yeah.
How much of that goes in? Because Sharon also writes some very, very meaty nonfiction. But when you're writing a novel, how much of that kind of book stuff do you allow to sneak in? Because
I would say less than 10% of the research I do actually gets in the book. But as with all of us, I think you have to know the background, and if I know it, then the little that I need for a particular scene will be there. Or they do say write what you know, and that's the reason. It's not, people say, oh, well, I'll just go read a couple of books on this subject and then I'll write a novel. But it just doesn't work, because you need to kind of be steeped in it. And then you don't have to tell everything.
You know what they call that? There's a term.
Don't know.
Wallpaper historical. It's where it's where the author puts in just enough historical, so it's wallpapers, but they're really just 21st century people walking around in like those old movies, in the 50s where the Middle Ages were all shiny and lovely.
Yeah. Wait, so may I ask you, like, how do you feel that affects your characters, like, fundamentally, being in that time period? Because the wallpaper, I'm sure you would have a handle on it, but are they significantly different? I mean, maybe they wouldn't talk like 20th century people.
No, they'd be speaking Old French.
Right. I mean, they are, but
I
are
mean,
they,
psychologically,
yeah,
are they different?
psychologically, like,
You know, there
how
are
different is it?
psychological differences, but as I once heard a biologist say, well, the thing is that human beings were hardwired 70,000 years ago, and our technology has progressed beyond our hardwiring. But, you know, you have the same things. Motives for murder have not changed since Cain and Abel. And people still love their children, and they get mad when their spouses cheat on them, and they have fights in business with other people. It's all, you know, the basic human needs and drives and feelings haven't changed.
How about with like a very religious character? Like, I feel like the 20th century, you would have a character who could, like, you know, get away with not having to have any contact with religion, but it might be a little bit more like Saudi Arabia in the Middle Ages.
In a
You
lot
would
of
have
ways.
a lot of
It wasn't
embedded in the culture.
Orthodox Judaism was the whole thing about, and in Strong as Death, there's a whole big deal about one man who's a Cohen, and a lot of the plot is around his feelings about something, and all of the things that Cohens were and are not still allowed to do. In the interview, I did an interview this morning, and I pointed out I was in Rome last year, and my friend and I just wandered into this park right across from the what's that thing where they run up and down? Yeah, the stadium thing, and not the Coliseum where they had the horse races.
Oh,
anyway,
Forum.
it was the Forum. Thank you, God, and it's even a Latin word. But there was a big sign there that said this used to be the Jewish cemetery, and we're not sure we got all the bodies when they moved it. So Cohens, beware. You know, if you're a Cohen, don't come in.
Oh, wow.
And so, are you a Cohen?
It's the priestly class.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Cohen is the priestly class. Yeah, and the Cohens and the Levites, and then everybody else is Israel, sort of like, you know, just your average scum. But anyway,
Salt of the earth, please.
yes, salt of the earth. but you know, in the Middle Ages, in that sense, here was this despised minority, and then you've got another minority within it who has a whole nother set of rules they have to follow, and that's part of the book. I mean, my books never have just one thread, but that's one of them.
I'd like to have each of us talk about what's next, since we are writers with careers, and you know, you probably are interested in what we're doing, and then I will open it up to questions. I will ask that any questions, I will repeat them so that they can get recorded. I will ask that any questions that you have, if they're individual questions, or I love your writing and would you sign my book, come up to us afterwards because we'll be here. But if any question you have, if you could make it something that the four of us, or at least two or three of us, could interact with it would, I think, be helpful to the rest of the audience. But we're not going to race away the minute we end, so you can come and talk. So Zoe, you talk about what you're doing next. You're sailing away from Saudi.
Yes, I am. I have just finished.
Are you happy about this?
Yeah, for the time being, I am. I really actually wrote my first book thinking, gosh, I've talked to people for many years about Saudi Arabia. Nobody knows anything about it, seems to me. I'm going to write a book so that they can just read the book, you know. And then I've talked about it more than I've ever since publishing the book for like 7 years. So I'm ready for a change, temporarily at least. I finished a young adult novel completely set in outer space, like, you know, something completely different. And I am working on another mystery that is set in medieval Italy. And it's about the interactions there between Arabs and Jews and Christians.
Italy or Sicily?
Italy, not Sicily, Salerno, actually. 12th century Salerno. Medical school.
I've got some books for you.
This is why I asked you about it, although I probably shouldn't have, like, bogarted the whole thing, but I would love to talk to you later. Thank you.
Sure.
Julia, what are you working on?
Oh, I'm going to be starting a new series set in Bora Bora. I was just inspired to this evening. No, I've got the 8th book in my Mysteries in the Claire Ferguson series is going to be coming out on the 5th of November for any of you who are Anglophiles. Remember the 5th of November? Yeah, isn't it great? It's snazzy. My publisher didn't even think of that. I recited that when they said it's going to be November 5th, and they kind of like looked at me. And it's I tend to write my books in sort of reaction to the previous book, and the previous book I wrote, One Was a Soldier, is a very wide open, kind of sprawling story with multiple viewpoint characters, and it's primarily about the return of a lot of a group of Iraq war veterans to this small town, and very diffuse and very full of, obviously, lots of social issues. And so I flipped around and said, I want to write something that's really as stripped down to thriller as I can manage, which is only semi-stripped down, because I don't strip down very much. Let me rephrase that. just erase that part. So it's my hero and heroine, Russ and Claire, in a cabin, a snowbound cabin on a frozen lake, with meth brewing killers after them. So
Light entertainment.
yeah.
So when is the Bora Bora one coming out?
Just as soon as I can make my travel arrangements.
Sharon.
Right now I'm doing another nonfiction for Palgrave, and it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, but couldn't afford academic advances. So it's a history of the first 50 years after the First Crusade, but it's not about the Crusaders, although I can't get away from them, but the people who were there at the time, and also most specifically the second generation, the children of the Crusaders who were there, who were born there, for whom that it's normal. Many of them spoke Arabic or Armenian, as well as their another parent's language. And I got to admit that reading the newspaper, one of the pictures in the book is going to be the 11th century minaret in Aleppo, as it was, and things survived 900 years.
Oh, wow.
And all I hear as I'm working it are echoes, every time I read the news. But that should be out before next Kalamazoo in May. Yeah, probably spring next year. And then I'm going to go back to novels because I miss dialogue.
Yes, dialogue. Dialogue is good to write. I have a book coming out in September. You will all see me again in September, not here, but there. It's set in Paris, 1929. I sort of have started this second series, third series, however many series it is, just because I wanted to write these characters again, and so my publisher seems to have fought the fact that I'm writing a series because they're selling it as a standalone, but it's a series. I wrote a book called Touchstone a few years ago, set in during the general strike in England in 1926, and it was my 9/11 book, my book about terrorism. And this book is Paris, 1929, and it's as you were saying, you can play with these echoes that come up when you're writing historical fiction, because it's or even historical nonfiction, because you are writing with an awareness of the modern audience. So so I'm writing about Paris, and it's September 1929. But every time the stock market is mentioned, you're aware that any modern reader is going to be saying, November 1929. So it's really fun to be able to do that. Paris is in the process of dying off as far as the American colony is going, and that's ideal for a crime writer. You don't want everyone happy. You want it after the real artists have all gone to the South and all of the real writers have gone home, and you know, the grifters and the hangers-on and the alcoholics are hanging out, and you think, hey, this is my kind of people. So, how about a question? Anyone have front row?
For the books that you all write and a lot of other books that I'm familiar with that are crime fiction with some kind of religious element, usually the main character, either the whole context is religious, like yours and yours, or the main character is somehow professionally religious, a monastic or a priest or whatever. So my question is, in the current publishing environment, can you get away with having a main character who is religious but not professionally so?
The question is, in the current publishing environment, can you have a story involving a main character who is religious but not professionally so? That is, the rabbi slept late. The rabbi. What do you feel? I mean, if you were just writing
question. I'm trying to think. You know, the first thing I thought of was there are actually books out there about the Amish, but that's actually this. It's culturally, it's the same sort of thing. It's embedded in the culture. I honestly can't think right off the top of my head of
The
books
first thing that
where
comes
you would
to
have
mind
it,
is just that so many crime characters, crime heroes are just so hard-bitten, just cynical, you know, like your average detective is either like an alcoholic, going to be an alcoholic, you know, someone who just doesn't necessarily involve himself or herself with
Well, the only
religion.
one I can think of is Faye Kellerman, who, you know, her characters are observant, but they're not,
Yeah.
they're not,
Yeah.
in clergy.
Yes, that is very interesting. That the ones that come to mind are those in which the religion is the entire point of the book.
Yeah, like the Christian publishing
Yeah.
houses where it's
Yeah.
you know it's you find the killer and Jesus at the same time.
There's a line for your next book.
That's it, boy. That's
In Bora Bora.
right after the that's it. Finding God in Bora Bora. That's going to be the title.
Over there in the corner.
I have a question that takes us kind of back to one of the basic things you started with, which is you talked about how the difference between religion and the difference between theology with your characters, and how religion you can make more relatable, like especially you really were talking about the practice and how you can engage the reader with the practice of the religion. How do you make the theology more relatable?
The question is, we were talking about how to make people relate to the practice of religion in a novel, but how do you do the same with theology?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, having said that all of the questions had to apply to all four, we're kind of tipping down to the end.
Yeah.
I think that I tend to use theological issues and questions in novels when they apply to the larger picture, so that in the Monstrous Regiment of Women, the whole point of that book is this dichotomy between a theological inquiry and the experience of religion. And you have to understand where Russell is coming from. Therefore, she has to talk about theology, and it acts as a bridge between her own very cerebral understanding of the divine and the person that she's working with, that she's trying to tutor, who experiences God within. And the language that they reach each other in is that of the rabbis, basically, is looking at the text and seeing what the text has to tell us. So, I mean, that's the way, and I think I've used that kind of technique in a number of books that aren't particular, I mean, they're not Russell books, but in each of them, I mean, I tend to be rather intellectual when it comes to God. I mean, my God speaks Koine Greek, so, sorry. That still small voice needs footnotes.
There's comparison made between morality plays and crime novels. Now, morality plays, you know, how do they deal with the evil? Well, they
them do.
Well,
Yeah.
crime novels, how do they go beyond morality plays dealing with evil? Or are they just like morality plays, basic human needs, morality plays?
I think, yeah.
The question
Sorry.
is how do crime novels deal with the concept of evil along the lines of the morality plays of the Middle Ages?
I think a tremendous amount of them do, because they all, almost all of them deal with, why do bad things happen to good people? And even if they don't talk about religion, there is still that eternal question that everybody is trying to figure out in some way or another. But the morality plays and the mysteries, at least you find justice. And justice is it's a way of comforting yourself that something bad happened to somebody good, but at least there was some kind of retribution, or at least solution.
I think that nowadays mystery writing is really very, very character driven. We sort of came up out of the puzzle mystery, decades and decades ago. But what people read mystery for nowadays, by and large, is character. And sometimes for recipes in the back of the book. If the writer is working this vein of having really characters that seem believable, I think you can't help but delve deeply into the heart of evil. Because one thing that I think we all say back and forth to each other is that nobody wakes up, and looks into their mirror and says, "I'm a villain." I'm going to be villainous today. And so as the writer, you really need to understand those characters, even the bad people, and what is driving them. And I think at that point, it's just a matter of how well you can portray it, so that readers can experience that character and those motivations as well.
Zoe?
Yeah, no, because we still don't have an answer to any of those questions, like why evil exists, or we can't really answer it.
I think that one of the differences, and it's not across the board, but there's a slight difference in crime fiction as opposed to the morality plays, is that in crime fiction the basic assumption is we can do something, and that in the morality play it is, this is the situation and this is how we achieve, our own haleness, our own health and well-being within it. But there's never any assumption that you can affect the evil in the world in a morality play, whereas in crime fiction there is. And in crime fiction the basic idea is the only people who can do something about evil is us. It is our responsibility to do something. But Zoe, I hope you take notes that next Saudi Arabian book, I want recipes in the back.
Yes.
Yeah? Everybody else? Okay. Your editor will love you because you have to send samples. So, okay? In the back.
Mrs. King, how do you handle, well, let me back up. Many of your books deal with cults. How do you translate or transform your point of view from writing about the formalized theology of Mary Russell with the characters in your books based on cult action? Is that a problem for you?
Well, in order to make this more of something that we as a panel can discuss, I'm going to just say the question has to do with cults and the further reaches of religious tradition. How do we as writers address something that is so extreme? I mean, I think Zoe, you particularly, you have to present these people as rational human beings who live in this, what to an outsider looks like a mad situation. And I think that, she's referring to a couple of books that I did that have to do with cults and extreme groups of believers. And I think you have to write from within. As Julie was saying, you don't wake up and think, I'm going to be a bad guy. The villain in any book thinks of himself or herself as the hero. I mean, in any story, the bad guy is the hero in their own story. And in any extremist cult, in fiction or otherwise, they're not the extremists. They are the rational ones. And it's the other people who are way far removed from the way of truth and right. So, I mean, this is a fascinating way of writing characters to make use of religion in that expression.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, if you're writing from the outside, it's just like the wallpaper thing, or it's maybe even rude in a way. It's just for the freak show aspect of it or something, rather than really trying to get inside and make sense of it. That's the crucial.
Yeah, I think getting inside the character it's the responsibility of the writer. And I mean, that's why we do what we do. I sort of keep turning my head on this side and letting you, okay.
Since you all write series, and since you have a character who is either asking theological questions or practicing a religion and then starts thinking, why am I doing this? Do you at all feel compelled, obligated, or inclined to develop your character, your series character, your investigator or detective, spiritual development? Is there a thread of their personal path that starts here and goes there?
The question is regarding our characters' personal development within the story.
Across the series, across your series.
Across the series.
Across the
I-
series as a personal growth.
That's I'd say you and I both have that in our books. One of the threads, one of the character arcs that occur is in my books is the growth and development of Claire as a brand new, newly ordained priest, into figuring out exactly what her role is, whether she is in the place that God intends for her to be, and how she can effectively be, both herself and the pastor. And it's been interesting because it was actually not something I'd planned when I started the books. I didn't realize this was going to be part of her character arc, was sorting all of that. I mean, I figured, okay, she's gotten ordained, she's in a parish, boom, that's it. But it wasn't. That turned out to not be it for her, and it's been an ongoing. She never questions her belief. I don't think she would ever do that. I don't think there's anything that would make her stop believing in God, but she does question whether she is where she should be, and she questions a lot whether or not she's a good priest and what she needs to do to be a good priest and a good person and be true to herself. And I know that Nair actually goes through a real interesting, exploration of his faith.
This makes me think of sort of the rule for writers of writing romance novels, which is like, when the couple gets together, the story's over. It's like, what's interesting is the struggle to get there, and then once you're there, it's not that interesting. And I think that may also be true in this case. I mean, that just popped into my head. I hadn't really thought about it, but, if any of our characters were just like totally perfectly like evolved to a point. So there is an arc, but it's not like in a certain upward trajectory. It's like a
Yes.
Right. Yeah. We are not our characters.
Now you've done that with Catherine and the others in there.
Yeah, part of it is that there are bodies, I promise. But what I'm really writing...
Like a medieval body.
Yeah, what I'm really writing is an old-time family saga, So Catherine is 18 when the first book begins. By the time of the 10th book, she's in her early 30s. Well, and she's had children, she's lost children. A lot of things have happened to her, and she grows like anybody else. Now, whether it's spiritual growth or emotional growth, I don't know. There are other minor characters who have spiritual awakenings. Catherine's father was a forcibly converted Jew, and he has been trying to find his way back ever since. And in one book, and I don't even remember which one, he finally just breaks and goes to the south of France, which, you know, why not? And but where there was a serious community, and he delves into the mysticism. So I think the characters grow and change and develop as they would in any series. You know, you don't, a good series doesn't have, I'm thinking about a series that I know where the characters, like, it's a book every year, but it actually only moves the action forward a month. So the characters don't really need to.
That's like Laurie's books.
Yes. Actually, I was thinking of Carolyn.
Mary Russell has had an extremely active.
Had a busy year.
Yes, but you started her off well before World War I. So, yeah.
It's a problem of having an older husband, right? You gotta move fast. I think that to my mind, as a writer or as a reader, the interesting part of a series is the character development that you can watch in there. Now, there are some great books that, honestly, it doesn't matter what order you read them in. I mean, I love the Jack Reacher books. There is nil character development in there. That's not what Lee is interested in. He tells a story, tells a great story. He doesn't talk about character development because that's not what he's into. But I think those of us who are writing a series that is actually a series, that is a flow of narrative between now and then, that, you know, the only reason to justify a series is because you are following these people and you are watching them and you are stepping in their shoes and you are feeling them change psychologically, spiritually, and all around them. So, yeah.
So how has your writing, all of your novels, affected you spiritually?
The question is, how has our writing affected us spiritually?
Oh, that's a good question.
I tend to pray more before a deadline. Anybody else?
Me? You? Unlike these other heathen, I think it has. I think that channeling someone who is so open to, you know, Claire is trying to do what Christians are called to do, which is to see Christ in everyone and respond to Christ in everyone. I personally find it very difficult to see Christ in everyone, and you know, it's because some people are not very likable, and it's, you know, or they smell funny or something like that. But I have found that by channeling her character, that it's helped me to work on that within myself as a human being and as an Episcopalian, to try and be more open and be more receptive to seeing people in that light, and also to doing things about it. Okay. Next question.
You know, it's a tough question. I'm not really sure. I can't say that I can chart my spiritual development in the course of 22 novels. Really, I think that if anything, it's driven me the opposite direction, because my editor now has me writing thrillers, and you gotta be really hard on your characters. So there's no room for spirituality in the Bones of Paris. I'm sorry. But I think spending any time within the head of even a fictional character gives you different points of view. So yeah, I suppose that it's true. Maybe, you know, if I write 100 novels, I will have done the effect of one penance. So maybe one or two more questions. Is that? Hi.
This is related question, and a personal one. It has to do with the first question that you asked each other, and the relationship between religion and theology. The question is whether in your writing, either as an individual novel or in your whole career of writing, your writing has affected your theology
is, has in any way our writing during our career affected our theology, which I would assume our way of looking at how we talk about God.
Anything for you?
That's a tough question.
Do you have a religious practice?
I do not practice Islam. I honestly, I did for a while, and I found that I preferred not to. I mean, it is actually very demanding on a daily basis. You're supposed to pray 5 times a day, and but there are things about it that I am reminded of in my writing, because I don't live in Saudi Arabia, and it really, in a way, keeps me there. That affects the practice of religion, not necessarily the theology. It's a tough question. I'm not sure.
I would imagine that you, I mean, you were saying you were exploring how this priest develops as a person, but that must also make the way that you look on God and God's function must have changed over a period of time.
You know, I find that over the how long, I think I've been writing these books for 10 or 11 years now. I think I have really, I think I've abandoned almost any, we do actually have sort of a few, not really rules, but sort of, you know, like, this is the way things are, doctrines, I guess, in Episcopalianism, and I pretty much abandoned all my doctrines and just really sort of opened up. I mean, and I'm not sure if that's actually writing the books, though, or it's just sort of the natural evolution of my own individual spirituality. You know, I during the course of writing these books, I became, for instance, a universalist. I personally don't believe that there is a hell. I believe that salvation will be available and is and will be for everyone, no matter what. There you go.
Well, that gives me comfort.
There you go. See, even those of you running off to south of France and Bora Bora will.
Well, if you thought of it first, you're just jealous.
I think we need to let the priest rebut my.
No, not at all.
Oh.
I had a question. I think all of you have said it. I only read you this book. I'm not going to go read all the other books. You had to do, it really was that question of how you do research, but also how you chose to write in person. So you write third person here, and as a visible priest, I feel like you are reading first person. And I just was fascinated reading about listening about this priest would know. An example being, you're in the parish hall at the church and there's 10 or more things going on in your needing attention. And you're attending to this one right here, and you're aware of the one up there. And I'm sure this is a universal phenomenon for people in that role, whatever their job is. But when your character, I'm fascinated with how resilient it is. How do you decide when you're writing? How do you help people get inside the head of a person and you do your character?
The question is about the person that we write in first or third person and how that helps us get inside the head of that individual. Sorry, did you?
Well, that might be a kind of a pragmatic answer to that, which is like when you're writing a murder, sometimes it's really helpful to be able to switch out of that and move into someone else's point of view. And there's just this kind of, it's an editorial thing. I've had no editor will ever, I think, really accept you starting out a book in first person and then suddenly shifting to, you know.
The true kind of thing is, I feel it's suddenly, I know
You're-
she's
you're-
writing third person and I feel
You're in that head. Well,
I'm in the
you know, that's
and
the
not just her character.
the technique that I use and a lot of us use is close third person, where it really, you could switch it out and you could write in first person, and it wouldn't make that much difference. In other words, you are tightly in your viewpoint character's head and emotions, and your viewpoint character only sees and understands what he or she sees. You know, it's very similar. You know, Mary Russell is, you know, the Russell books are in first person, and she can interpret what she sees people reaction and their facial features and things, but she can't know. And it's the same thing with close third person. It puts you very intimately into the head. The big advantage of it is that you can go from head to head fairly seamlessly. You know, I mean, you have chapters where you're Nair and you're in Nair's experience, and you have to have it for your books because you can't show both male and female experiences unless you're intimately in the heads of them, and then you switch and it's from Katya's point of view, and it's a technique for doing that. And then the rest of it is just the writer's imagination. It goes back to creating these characters that are well developed and well imagined and well researched, so that when you read them, I mean, the ideal experience is when you read is that you feel like you're stepping inside someone else's life and living it for that period of time. Yes.
It's fascinating how, you would think that a first-person narrative is much easier to write an honest view of the character, so that you would think that writing Mary Russell in the first person would be easy to show all aspects of her life. But in fact, first person has these weird limitations because we are all self-deluded. None of us see ourselves honestly. And I had a lot of fun with that in one of the books because she is the unreliable narrator. She remembers things that happened a different way. And so I found that I had to do sections of that book in the third person from Holmes's point of view to look at, because she's going along in one direction and he looks at her and sees something very different. So it was a lot of fun doing those sort of, and I've used this a couple of times just because, first person is weirdly limiting.
Yeah, I've done first person short stories, but I don't think I would want to do a whole book in first person. For one thing, I feel it's too constricting. I like to jump into someone else's head.
It really enables you to explore the voice. I mean, I think that in first person, the primary strength is that you can develop voice. Mary Russell's voice is primary in the books in a way that it can't be if you're third person, because in the that's a narrative that's telling everybody, and they can talk in a certain way, but then you go back to the narrative. But if it says pompous old woman, one more.
Who you all
But we just read each other. I'm trying to think, anybody?
Anything you're really looking forward to this year?
Looking forward to this year.
I have to say one of my favorite books in the last couple of years has been Gods of Gotham, Speaking of God. Doesn't actually have to do with gods, but by Lindsay Fay. It's a story about New York, the beginning of the police department in New York in the 1840s, 1850s. Beautifully written book, fascinating subject, gorgeously researched, and she has a second one coming out this summer, so I'm really looking forward.
Nominated for an Edgar Award for best novel.
And she should have won it.
Sorry. I was on the committee for that.
It's okay. So, anyone you're particularly interested in?
Well, I can give I actually had a list because I read for the Edgar Awards, which means I read every book that was not a debut mystery published, or at least delved into it a little bit, in 2012.
And yet she didn't nominate me.
Yeah, well, you gotta be the top tier. She's never going to blurb my books now. We had this sort of list running in the committee. It's like books that people ought to know about. They're not, they didn't get nominated for. And I read a really terrific one called Clawback by Mike Cooper, which is about a computer expert and financial, like high finance shenanigans, both of which, normally would have left me, completely cold. And he did this terrific job for it. And I have to check, I'm really hoping he's going to have a sequel for it, because I just loved it. It was a great thriller with some great characters. So That's my recommendation.
Now, other than your Latin text that you were thrilled at.
That's all I can think of right now. The problem is that I don't have a lot of time to write each book, and so I only get to read fiction on planes. And I think I had to make this rule.
Yeah.
Otherwise, because if I sit down and read something, I reread Terry Pratchett a lot, but I think the last book, apart from the ones, because I read your books on the planes, I think the last one I read was The Pirate King, the last piece of fiction, which was very satisfying.
On a plane?
On a plane.
Zoe, do you have anyone that you?
I'm revisiting Elizabeth George. She's a wonderful mystery writer. She's got character stuff nailed. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say again, what was
Elizabeth George.
Well, I thank you very much for coming out. Please buy a book, have us sign it. Go out and